Hello, and welcome to Assisted Outpatient Treatment, Introduction to the Ethical Considerations. My name is Scott Smith, and I'm a technical consultant here with the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice. To begin with, just a refresher on what assisted outpatient treatment is. Assisted outpatient treatment, AOT for short, also known as Kevin's Law in Michigan, is a legal mechanism for providing outpatient treatment to individuals living with serious mental illness whose non-adherence to treatment places them at risk for negative outcomes. Many individuals living with serious mental illness do not adhere to outpatient treatment for a variety of reasons, increasing their risk for suicide and self-harm, violent behavior, substance misuse, insecure housing, and high utilization of services. These behaviors and vulnerabilities also lead to a high rate of inpatient psychiatric hospitalization and incarceration. AOT orders work by compelling the recipient to receive specific treatment that will prevent their condition from worsening and by committing the mental health system to provide the treatment. The focus of this training is to start the conversation around the ethical considerations related to AOT. It is only intended to familiarize you broadly with the concerns, not to go into depth on the issues or provide academic review of these issues. In this training, we will cover the basics of the risks and benefits associated with assisted outpatient treatment, AOT versus other court-ordered treatment approaches, and finally, ways to safeguard the rights of someone on an AOT. As I'll mention later, you can find much more detail on all of these issues on the AOT Toolkit website. Risks and benefits associated with AOT. The first place we have to start under this category is the coercive nature of assisted outpatient treatment, like all forms of involuntary treatment. This includes guardianship. This includes involuntary hospitalization, short-term hospitalization, that is. This includes the incarceration of people living with a mental illness whose crime was related to their mental illness. The sad reality is that there's no easy or simple solution, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that this is coercive, and as a result, some of these rights can be eroded. Another concern that we want to be aware of is that anytime we are compelling or forcing somebody, coercing them to get treatment, that this can result in disempowerment, them feeling less able to make good decisions, less able to find the ability to make good choices for themselves, choices that will benefit themselves. Now, there are ways that we can try to circumvent some of those risks, but it is a risk nonetheless. There are also many civil liberty considerations. And unlike under criminal court rules, civil court processes can be spread out over a longer period of time. The timeframes for getting a hearing can be much longer than what are allowed under criminal court procedures. However, this is balanced against the reality that this is still a civil court procedure. And when it remains a civil court procedure, there are far fewer serious consequences than there are when it's a criminal court procedure. And this leads us to the next concern, and that is the potential melding of civil and criminal consequences. Assisted outpatient treatment is designed, and the best approach is to keep it a civil procedure. However, there have been talks nationwide about the possibility of using AOT in the criminal realm. And currently in Michigan, we discharge individuals from state psychiatric hospitals who were placed there because they were found to either be guilty but not mentally ill, or not guilty by reason of insanity. And for those individuals who were placed into that type of treatment versus prison, a recent court decision resulted in an administrative decision to release those individuals on an AOT. Now, if they had been incarcerated in prison, it would have remained in the criminal realm, and they would have been placed under community corrections in some capacity. This places somebody from the criminal realm into the civil realm. And while the approach might have merit, it's important to note that this melding of civil and criminal consequences can have dire effects down the road if it starts becoming more and more of a criminal use. The next point is something that I and others informally refer to as the weaponization of AOT. AOT is designed for specific circumstances. And anytime that AOT is used outside of those circumstances, there's a potential for serious consequences to the person receiving the treatment. One thing that's important is that whether you're a family member, law enforcement officer, clinician, member of the court, it's always important to ask whether AOT is absolutely necessary or if there are other avenues of treatment engagement that could be tried before going all the way up to requesting an assisted outpatient treatment order. And the last point we'll discuss in this webinar under the risks associated with AOT is the concern that courts, instead of clinicians, could end up determining care. Because the courts are involved and because they are granted statutory authority to initiate these orders, they could potentially order services that are not appropriate or unwarranted or too limiting of a person, and do so without clinician feedback or in spite of clinician feedback. The process is not supposed to occur this way, but we have to acknowledge that the risk exists. We now turn to the benefits associated with AOT. And the point I want to make is that anytime we're engaging in any form of treatment, across healthcare, including mental health, is we are not choosing usually between something that has no harm and all benefits versus something with some risk. Virtually everything includes some risk. And the goal is always to make sure that the benefits outweigh the risks. One of the benefits that can come from an assisted outpatient treatment order is improved care and quality of life resulting from the use of evidence-based practices that were part of that AOT order. In an ideal world, every mental health provider would use evidence-based approaches to care. Sadly, we know that this doesn't happen. An AOT order could help ensure that evidence-based approaches are utilized. Additionally, many of the treatments that are available under AOT can have the effect of increasing a person's insight into their illness, which leads them to better decision-making and the potential to more quickly exit an AOT order and return to autonomous function. Similarly, we know that when utilized properly, it can result in reduced contact with law enforcement, including arrests. And this obviously leads to greater autonomy. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. We also know that a reduction in psychiatric hospitalizations, especially involuntary hospitalizations, is possible when assisted outpatient treatment is used properly. And this also increases an individual's autonomy. And then finally, ideally, the courts are involved and can serve as an additional layer of protection to safeguard the rights and ensure that treatment is provided to the client. AOT versus other court-ordered treatment approaches. There are several different court-ordered treatment approaches that are utilized. AOT is one of them. And the first one I want to talk about is AOT versus problem-solving courts. Both AOT and problem-solving courts seek to help people with a mental illness avoid harmful consequences, but take very different approaches. One big difference is that AOT is designed to be handled in civil court. And this is a place without the punitive sanctions of fines and incarceration that can occur in criminal court where problem-solving courts operate. Additionally, we know that problem-solving courts begin with people waiving several of their constitutional rights, the rights of the accused, in exchange for avoiding criminal sanctions if, and only if, they complete the treatment ordered. If they don't complete it, whether it's their fault or not, and we've seen some cases nationwide where treatment providers have not provided the services that they said they could provide, the individual is now subject to the full consequences of the crime that they have fully admitted to. The next point is that in terms of coerciveness, both approaches are problematic. However, only the problem-solving court has the criminal consequences, and this is arguably far more coercive. In fact, those same criminal consequences, when imposed, carry future consequences such as limitations in employment, governmental support limitations like federal student aid to go back to school. And in turn, these lead to additional barriers to treatment, potentially making it harder for somebody to have the future autonomy and health from a managed mental illness. And then the final point here, and this is really, really important for us to keep in mind. The whole goal of AOT is to prevent, among other things, contact with the criminal justice system, to try to preempt somebody from even being arrested or charged, let alone even have law enforcement interact with them. The other court-ordered approach that is in fact very, very common is guardianship. And I want to be clear that there are times when guardianship is absolutely necessary and vital for the well-being of an adult living with a serious mental illness. However, guardianship is very restrictive, and AOT may offer some people a much better alternative because, first, AOT has a time limit, unlike guardianship. You know, an initial order for AOT is 6 months. Guardianship is ordered yearly, and sadly, it is very common for the courts to not really review much other than the required documentation that has to be submitted in order to continue a guardianship order. Guardianship also is going to be far more expansive in terms of what it allows another person to do. So in terms of coercion, guardianship allows another individual who may or may not have been designated by the recipient to decide where their money goes, where they're going to live, what essentially they're going to be allowed to do by limiting their resources. And interestingly, and this is the next and final point to make here, while AOT is specific to treatment, what is necessary for a person to become treatment adherent and therefore no longer in need of court supervision, guardianship isn't limited to treatment. In fact, it may not even allow for treatment decisions to be made. So think about a scenario where somebody is in need of a guardian because of their serious mental illness, and yet a guardianship order does not give the guardian any power to, help the person necessarily get that treatment they need. They might be able to consent on behalf of the individual, but nothing even compels them to do that. So in situations where a guardian perhaps does not believe that mental illness is a legitimate problem, does not believe that psychiatric interventions are ever helpful, it could literally become a barrier to a person getting better. Now, we have to end with an acknowledgement that because of the risks of a person's rights being infringed when receiving AOT, that it's imperative we know some of the ways that we can safeguard these rights. When we talk about safeguarding the rights of an individual on an assisted outpatient treatment order, we recognize that the court is supposed to serve as a check and balance on this process, but it's still vital that you as a family member, loved one, concerned party, or recipient, that you first understand how the court process works, including the deadlines for hearings, including what paperwork has to be filed, how you can avail yourself of a hearing to contest something. This is laid out in detail on the AOT Toolkit website. Next, it's very important that you learn about the ways to get an AOT order terminated, how to request a hearing to have the order dismissed, your right to counsel. And you can find this information on the court website for your county, the probate court website. Finally, you need to understand the rights that all people have when receiving mental health treatment in Michigan. That's known as recipient rights. And you can find links to recipient rights on our toolkit as well. And this is also valuable for individuals who have graduated or been released from an AOT order so that they can ensure they continue to receive the proper treatment and have a voice in their care. Thank you for your time, for allowing us to start this conversation about the ethical considerations. Again, this is a very cursory introduction, and we look forward to your feedback and to an ongoing conversation about how we can partner together to ensure that recipients of mental health care get the best possible care and have the best possible outcomes. AOT Toolkit is a very helpful resource to help you learn more about AOT in general, and I encourage you to visit it just to make sure that you stay up to date on all things related to AOT.